The person who succeeded Rajiv Gandhi was P.V. Narasimha Rao. The circumstances were tragic, sudden and dramatic. India was suddenly thrown into turmoil. But P.V. Narasimha Rao was a veteran of the Congress party, a leader who had been in waiting for long. He had an image of being a very scholarly person, a person well versed in history, political science. He spoke and read many languages. He had experience as an external affairs minister of the foreign policy of India also. So it was, in one sense, not such a traumatic break as could have been, but Narasimha Rao had always lived in the Congress party under the shadow of a member or the other of the Nehru dynasty. So this was for the first time that a member of the non-Nehru dynasty was going to complete 5 years in office without any interruption. He was only the second person from non-Hindi speaking states to become the prime minister. So people had expectations of a kind of a stability, a kind of leadership from Narasimha Rao, which was probably not unreasonable. How did it impact on the foreign policy of India is what concerns us here. Was it a break from the policies of the Nehruvian family, Nehruvian legacy? But as we have noticed in a lecture earlier, the foreign policy, the problem of continuity and change, is a perpetual one. And even when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India, there were remarkable departures from the foreign policy of his mother, Srimati Indira Gandhi. And Mrs. Gandhi also had departed in significant ways with the road shown by her father, Jawaharlal Nehru. And one must also remember, when there was in the past a non-Congress government in the center, a coalition government of the Janata Party, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, one of the major critics of the Congress party, had said that he would much rather have a consensual continuity in the foreign policy rather than conflicts and dissensions. So this issue again was reopened when Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister of India. How much of it would be continuity? How much would be change? How much would be his own imprint on the foreign policy? Before he could take any major step in this direction, something tragic happened. The Babri Masjid, a centuries-old structure, was demolished in Ayodhya. There had been events leading up to this for a long time, when there had been an OBC reservation and the Mandal Commission implementation. To cope with the challenge of the Mandal Commission, the phrase has it that the BJP and the Hindu nationalist parties tried to put forward the counter of the Kamandal. The Kamandal was the use of religion. The Kamandal was synonymous with the demand to build a Ram temple, a grand Ram temple where the Babri Masjid once stood. The argument being that the masjid had been erected on the ruins of a temple in times of Babur. That's a long history. There's a dispute which should not concern us here. But what is important is the demolition of the Babri Masjid triggered a chain of events in the Prime Ministership of Narasimha Rao, which raised questions about his neutrality, his objectivity, his efficiency, his reluctance to take decisive action when it was required. How could this man be active in foreign policy? And the same problem was the demolition of Babri Masjid triggered a chain of reactions. There were Bombay bomb blasts, and as a reaction to Bombay bomb blasts, there were widespread rioting in Bombay, and countrywide the tempers rose high and the tensions were about communal harmony being seriously jeopardized. Now, there are various arguments about who was responsible for the demolition of the Babri Masjid. As long as the law and order is a state subject, P.V. Narasimha Rao could argue that it was the primary responsibility of the UP government, and the UP government should have taken enough precautions. And if UP government, the chief minister, had given him the assurance that the law and order would be maintained and no untoward incident would take place, how would the prime minister interfere unnecessarily or without any constitutional authority? At the same time, people say that because the issue was so important that it impinged on integrity and in national sovereignty of India, because it led immediately to tensions with Pakistan, led to internal security challenges, Narasimha Rao should have taken a more deep interest. As the story goes, as his biographers have put it, he meditated for a long time, went to sleep, did not want his the routine to be disturbed, and he only was available when the Babri Masjid had been demolished. That followed a long period of lamentations, breastfeeding and so on, and the blame game started. But this demolition of Babri Masjid left P.V. Narasimha Rao with the challenge of trying to maintain communal harmony within the country, cope with the challenge of terrorist attacks like Bombay blasts and the rioting which followed immediately. So this distracted him from taking a major initiative in the foreign policy. Soon afterwards, there were signs of terrorist activity being increased in Kashmir also. There was a number of kidnappings. There were foreigners were kidnapped, the Israeli tourists were kidnapped, some Europeans were kidnapped, some relief workers were kidnapped. At times, Narsingh Rao succeeded through negotiations to secure a release of foreign terrorists. In some cases, it could not be. There was a time when the terrorists took hold of the holy shrine of Hazrat Bal, and there have been incidents where these shrines have been desecrated by terrorists. There have been cases of arson, and then government can be blamed for not being cautious enough, not being taken warning in time. So Narsingh Rao had to cope with Kashmir, and much to his credit, it must be said, that he succeeded in convincing the rest of the world that all these activities were at the instance of Pakistan. So this export of terrorists into Kashmir, Valley of Kashmir, and also encouraging the organized criminal syndicates to undertake bomb blasts, etc., to destabilize India, was not only internal dissidents. It was basically projected, propagated, and sponsored by Pakistan. So I think we must, while we should not overlook the criticism of Narsingh Rao for Somalians when Babri Masjid was demolished, the fact remains that he managed to restore peace and order in the major part of the country very soon afterwards, and carried on the diplomatic campaign against Pakistan. The second thing which we must remember very carefully is that he did things incrementally, slowly. He was not a man given to dramatic flourishes, charismatic pronouncements. He would do piecemeal engineering, and so was the case in Indian foreign policy. This was the man who thought that no foreign policy could be effective unless India's economic condition improved. And he had inherited the government where it was not, if not exactly at the verge of bankruptcy, the economic indicators were not too very healthy. So what he did, he started implementing what Rajiv Gandhi had promised early in his term of office, to liberalize the economy, open India to the rest of the world, and bring out economic reforms which would, and give up the sloganeering of socialism, so that Indian energies could be unleashed, the entrepreneurship. And one thing which helped Narsingh Rao at this time was that the world was encountering globalization in a fairly accelerated form. So the two things coincided. Narsingh Rao was prepared to take a decisive lead in adopting economic reforms, liberalizing. He put the finance ministry in charge of Manmohan Singh, a renowned economic expert and academic, a man of unimpeachable integrity, and he let him do the job. So Manmohan Singh undertook the task of economic liberalization and restored the health of Indian economy. Once this was done, once India started registering a rate of economic growth which was faster than the much maligned Hindu rate of growth, which was much better than what, next to China, India probably was the fastest growing economy for a short while during Manmohan Singh's regime. And there was a whole lot of new enthusiasm, and the world looked at India as a place of opportunity. This necessarily helped Narsingh Rao's foreign policy. When India was opening up, the foreign direct investment in India was increased. People thought that Indian market would be open to them for in terms of services, in terms of products, and these hopes were not entirely belied. The task of economic liberalization continued apace during Narsingh Rao's time, and this created opportunities in the sphere of foreign policy. The other thing which he did incrementally, which tends to be forgotten very easily, was to normalize India's relationship with Israel. So once this was done, there were some kind of diplomatic relations, but they were not at the level of ambassadors. And once Narsingh Rao restored the relationship to ambassadorial level, what was easier is that India could cooperate with Israel in counter-terroristic strategy, intelligence sharing, not only in Kashmir, but in the larger context of the Islamic challenge of fundamentalist terrorism, and even vis-a-vis Pakistan. So India opened up an opportunity during Narsingh Rao's time by opening up a door to Israel, paving the path for more closer relationships, also liberalizing the country and taking full advantage of the globalization which was coinciding to open up with other countries stronger ties. The third thing which tends to be forgotten is that Narsingh Rao came out with a statement that let's look east. Now, look east was an extremely interesting policy because by that time it was clear that the China was working closely in league with Pakistan, and China had followed a strategy of encircling India with the poison pearls. So when Narsingh Rao talked of look east, it meant that India would look beyond immediately the South Asian region, where China was trying to keep it confined within this first concentric circle. We would look towards Bangladesh, we would look towards Bhutan, we would look towards beyond South Asia to Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and the ASEAN countries. Now, the ASEAN countries had been always closely tied from their inception with the American alliance system, and Malaysians and Singaporeans also had close ties with Western countries. So as long as India was closest to Soviet Union and later Russia, and as long as India followed socialistic policies and India was a closed economy, obviously closer ties with these countries could not be formed. This was the time talk about BIMSTEC started, so connecting Ganga with Mekong started. And the interesting part is this is again a close correspondence with the economic foreign policy. Because whenever India talked about Southeast Asia, the tendency was to talk about a past centuries-old ties, the cultural ties, the Indian immigrants, Indian diaspora there, but not really much beyond that. So Narsingh Rao was the one who also talked in terms of economic ties with this region, which would restore the balance not only in South Asian region, but also probably would countervail the Chinese influence. Not much could take place in this case again. Look East policy, before it could be followed, Narsingh Rao himself found himself trapped in charges of corruption. There was a pickle maker called Lakhubhai Pathak who said that he had given 1 crore of rupees, not a very big sum, but given it to Narsingh Rao to get some favors done. And Narsingh Rao, who till then had stayed as a bachelor, suddenly was surrounded by his family and friends, and a whole lot of unsavory characters concentrated around the Prime Minister. There was the tantric godman called Chandraswamy, who among his devotees counted Adnan Khashoggi, who was an arms dealer. And these arms dealers, plus mystics, plus tantrics, plus occult workers, surrounded Narsingh Rao in a manner that people thought that he was a person who sympathized with the Hindutva forces and was perhaps an ultra-nationalist in the closet. Now, this issue can never be decided, but the fact remains that he was a scholar of Sanskrit, he was a believing Hindu, he was a practicing Hindu. He chose to project himself as an outsider in Delhi, an observer of what was going on, but he actually was a silent insider all along. So he left, he delegated a lot of authority to other ministers, to government officials, primarily to Manmohan Singh, and he continued to work silently behind in the wings. So this was one part of the contribution of Narsingh Rao to Indian foreign policy. Another significant part of Indian foreign policy, which seems to be overlooked as a contribution of Narsingh Rao, is the preparation for Pokhran II. No less than a person that Atal Bihari Vajpayee admitted that the father of the Pokhran II, the Indian nuclear bomb, was actually Narsingh Rao. He said, by Vajpayee in modesty, I was the only one who exploded it. Now, interestingly, the jury is still out to discuss whether Narsingh Rao had given the go-ahead to the nuclear energy establishment in India to do the test, but the Americans got wind of this, put pressure on him, and ultimately his nerves failed. So he ultimately left a message to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Samagri tayar hai, all the ingredients are ready. So these are the 3 or 4 major points of the 5-year period when Narsingh Rao, most important contribution is embarking on the path of economic liberalization and committing India to globalization. The moment this was done, the closer relationship with America became possible. The closer relationship with the EU and the major countries in Europe, France, and Germany became possible. At the same time, when he talked of look east, he opened a vista which for economic relations and cooperation, which people had only thought in terms of vague historical cultural relationship. So Southeast Asia became very much a realm where India could become active and project its soft and other power. His preparing for a nuclear explosion was, I think, something which should not be underestimated. And also the only blemish is the Babri Masjid demolition and his indecisiveness. But post Babri Masjid demolition, whatever terroristic activities took place in India. He succeeded in curbing and controlling them. He also succeeded in pointing out to the world that most of these activities were not the work of dissidents within India, but were export of terrorism from Pakistan. So I think Narsingh Rao should be given credit for this. And when Narsingh Rao demitted office, a period of uncertainty followed. There was a period of a year and a half to 2 years when the prime ministers were like Deve Gowda and I.K. Gujral, and there were uncertainties about Indian foreign policy, particularly during the period of Deve Gowda, because Deve Gowda had a very provincial outlook, a very parochial mindset. He was caught sleeping several times in the parliament, but people who were sympathetic to him would say that he was not sleeping, he was only meditating and contemplating, he was listening all the time. But the fact is that he was not particularly interested in what was happening beyond India's borders. His primary interest remained like his illustrious predecessors like Charan Singh and others, his home state. He was happy about the politics of Karnataka, and he was a reluctant prime minister, if one might say so, a compromise candidate. He did not last very long, and no foreign policy initiative during his period made sense. But the person who followed Deve Gowda, I.K. Gujral, was again a very interesting person. He had been an information and broadcasting minister. He had been a communist in his party member in his student days. He had participated in the Indian national struggle. He was a man who was now part of a non-Congress government, a coalition government, but he had been a very close follower of the Nehru-Gandhi clan. He had been an information minister earlier. He had been in the New Delhi Municipal Corporation. He was supposed to be close to Mrs. Gandhi, and his brother was also patronized by the Nehrus and Mrs. Gandhi, the famous sculptor and painter Satish Gujral, because these people ideologically sympathized with the Marxists, the socialists, and that was the period when such intellectuals were very much in demand. And he was a suave man. He was well-read. He could speak good English. He could write good English. He could speak Urdu, Hindustani, Punjabi. But there was a problem. He also had illusions about his capabilities, and he thought that he would make a distinctive imprint on Indian foreign policy when he got the time. This was the time when the Gujral doctrine was formulated. In short, the gentleman who used the word Gujral doctrine was Bhavani Sen Gupta in an article, a scholar writing in international affairs. But the Gujral doctrine stipulated one thing. It says that India should not wait for reciprocity. India should make unilateral concessions to its smaller neighbors to win them on its side. And it should, again, like reiterated some of the Panchsheel things, respect each other's sovereignty, don't interfere in each other's affairs, resolve all disputes through peaceful dialogue. But the important part was to build confidence, the confidence building measure. You don't expect reciprocity. You make a unilateral concession. Now, some people argued that this was a policy of appeasement to win popularity in the immediate neighborhood. But Mr. Gujral's argument, which he expatiated later after demitting office, was he never defended himself. He said, the way I look at it, India has had to cope with two hostile, belligerent enemies on two sides, China and Pakistan, often colluding. So it is in our interest, it is real political, that to make concessions to Bangladesh, to Bhutan, to Nepal, to Sri Lanka, to Maldives. So we remain happy in the neighborhood. We can't do much about China, we can't do much about Pakistan, but we can at least keep the rest of the smaller neighbors happy. The only disadvantage of Gujral doctrine was that the neighbors got into the mindset that India would keep making these unilateral concessions to them, and they got used to being appeased, and then expectations were constantly raised. So I think Gujral left a legacy which was more bothersome for his successors. So neighborhood was not pacified, neighborhood was not appeased, neighborhood was not entirely pleased, and it rose expectations. The second flaw in Mr. Gujral's foreign policy was that Gujral belonged to a generation which was pre-partition. They had become adult in pre-partition, and their nostalgic memories of pre-partition Punjab, Lahore, Pakistan continued to haunt them. So there was this nostalgia pre-partition undivided India, which gave them, a kind of a sentimental attachment to Pakistan. although he did not make a specific concession to Pakistan, nor did he have the time to give it, but he had a sort of advisors, all of whom belong to this generation. And actually, the process had started with Narsingh Rao. Rajiv Gandhi represented a younger generation, a younger India, and evoked certain goodwill because of that. The moment he was assassinated and Narsingh Rao came, it appeared a throwback to an earlier generation. Gerontocracy had taken over again. When I.K. Gujral became the Prime Minister, the tendency was even more pronounced that the world was globalizing. India had embarked on the path of globalization, but the Trotskyite look-alike iron gold rimmed glasses and the small French cut beard reminded people that Mr. Gujral perhaps still was stuck in a time warp. He was thinking still in terms of a socialist world, a Marxist worldview, while the world had changed. But we cannot pronounce a judgment on this one because the Congress withdrew support and Gujral did not last very long either. And this period, the period of uncertainty was over. But the problem remained. Neighbors had tasted blood, and Gujral doctrine would remain as some kind of a albatross around the necks of anybody who came. This brings us to one interval in Indian foreign policy where post Rajiv Gandhi, two decisive things took place. Economic liberalization, India embarking on the path of globalization, India trying to cope with terror with the help of like-minded counter-terrorist countries like Israel and elsewhere, and also trying to get wise to how the neighbors should not make their space available to anti-Indian activities, but at a cost. So the Gujral doctrine led to the theory of confidence-building measures, placating the smaller neighbors. The first one was opening up India's doors and windows to the world. And of course, the third thing was look east policy. All these three were more or less incorporated with Atal Bihari Vajpayee when he assumed power. It is interesting, Atal Bihari Vajpayee first had a 13-day government, then a 13-month government. But the period between 1998 and 2004, the 6-year period, is really important in the context of India's foreign policy because Mr. Vajpayee did not like to upset the apple cart. When he was the External Affairs Minister in the Morarji Desai's government, he had talked in terms of continuity, and true to his word, he remained following a foreign policy which was not contentious but was consensual. But at the same time, he undertook major departures, the path for which had been partly prepared by Narsingh Rao. He didn't have to worry about initiating economic liberalization. He didn't have to worry about giving a go-ahead about the nuclear explosion. But then that's a story which follows a little later.